Welcome back to the build of the gigantic Triton lava table. We'll work on the reverse adding metal brackets, we'll remove the excess epoxy, clean it up, and we'll cut the table to its final size. It's about a week later and the resin is fully cured. Rather than two halves, the table is now one solid single piece. The resin we've poured has added about 70 kilos to the total weight, but a lot of that will be coming off as we trim the table to its final thickness. 3 meters of European walnut joined down the middle with a two-tone epoxy pour. 1 Triton orange, 1 clear. Seeing this for the first time was a great moment. We're really glad we did it this way. A clear pour on top of an opaque one is a great way to make the most of the wood you've chosen. The job is far from over though. As you can see in the light reflections, resin rarely dries flat, so let's fix that. It's time to flatten with the router again. We repurposed the base of the box mould and built another slabbing jig, the same as the first, a flat base and raised edges, only this time much bigger. The table's weight was doing most of the work, but to help it lay flat, and to make sure it wasn't going to shift while we worked on it, we drilled through the end of the table and used large screws to fix it down. We'll cut these parts off later. Router ready, we identified the highest point on the table and started there. That way we'd learn the best process to follow, and if we made a mistake, we'd have more table left, so it'd be easier to fix. Always give yourself the best chance of success. The rack and pinion feature unique to Triton routers is super useful for repeat work like this. It's a height adjustment feature where you twist the handle to change the depth of the router cutter by set increments. We'd adjust the height with perfect consistency, lock it, do the passes we needed, and adjust it again. Resin cuts easier than wood does, but because it's static and it melts, it feels way messier. Progress was slowed by the amount of cleanup we were doing. We're getting up to this high point here, where the wood has come above the epoxy. We suspect the wood is thicker though, because the orange epoxy underneath hasn't bled seriously under there, so that must have been flush when we did it. A quick progress check to see the before and after. Clear on top, wood slab flat, and table yet to flatten. It's taken a fair time because we are, at the moment, we found a low point and we're routing to that, so you see we're probably taken about a centimetre in a single pass. Doesn't look so good. Getting this done was a two-man job and a real team effort. With each pass we'd turn the router on, carefully shift the sled over about an inch, and gently push it through the resin across the sled while the other person vacuumed. We couldn't use the built-in extraction point on the router because we needed the base to be a really snug fit in the sled. The table was so wide that we had to swap jobs every time we got to the middle, carefully giving control of the router to the other person and changing who was doing the vacuuming. Matching your router's speed to the job you're doing is important, both for safety and for the quality of the cut. Larger router bits will typically have a lower maximum speed, and they're often doing more cutting with each rotation. Setting the router too fast, or not moving the tool fast enough, may burn the piece you're cutting. Likewise, setting the router too slow may also negatively affect your cut. The harder the wood, the faster you'll probably need to set your router. Having the bit moving faster means the cutter will take less wood with each rotation, allowing it to do a better job. Getting a feel for what's right does take time and experience. You'll have to consider the material you're cutting, the size of the router bit, and the speed at which you're moving the tool. So we are done with the first pass. We've taken about 8mm off. You'll stand back so you can actually get an idea of the scale of this thing. It's 3 meters long. Nearly done flattening. Some silicon dams were still visible, so another shallow pass of the whole table was necessary. But being shallower, this was much faster work. So we're out the back of Crimson today. There she is. This is the back end. We're upside down at the moment. We're going to be taking off the resin that remains from where we were damming the orange kind of initial fill layer. So we'll be taking that off just in a thin pass and making it a bit flatter. Of course, this side isn't going to be finished to the same extent that the other one is going to be. But having now slabbed the other side, before final sanding on that, we just want to, I guess, make sure that this is, well, as good as we can make it. Power planers are exceptionally useful tools for flattening wood, and handheld, there aren't many that come bigger than this. The TPR180 is a 7-inch wide triple blade planer with a huge footprint. If you've ever got a big project that needs a flat side, this is what to use. This planer has a triple blade drum, Unique to Triton, it means you get an extra 50% cuts per minute versus a typical 2-blade planer. 3 blades means each does less work, so they give an extra fine finish and last longer. We used this 7-inch planer for the majority of the basic flattening work that we started earlier. The area where the orange met the silicone needed some extra attention. Watching the surface change with every pass was very satisfying. We gave nearly the whole slab a once over with the big planer, and then used the smaller Triton mini planer to tackle specific areas that needed more attention. If I was to choose 2 planers for my workshop, it would be these 2. Rain stopped progress for a while, and when we resumed we brought the sanders back out to give the back of the slab a nice consistent finish. We're not going to do too much more to the reverse, because the top side is the showpiece. We are finished with a rough sand of the back. Gone over the whole thing with 2 4-inch belt sanders at 60 grit. All we wanted to do was really just key it and take out any high points, all in the same direction. We've had one of the 4-inch sanders working on the wood and the other one on the resin, so as not to gum up the paper too much. That is pretty much the back sorted. Next job is these steel beams here. We're going to use these to support the table, chock it in places and pull it level if the wood does want to move. So we're going to drill holes at various intervals along. So you notice that the edges are still in their sort of natural loose resin form. We're going to leave these like this for as long as we can for moving the table about. At the moment it's simply too heavy to move comfortably, so we will run a track saw down it, take the edge off. We'll probably lose, I don't know, 10 maybe 15 centimetres off of each end, and then only a couple centimetres, maybe 1 or 2 off the sides, just to get the excess off. We want to keep as much of this interesting inclusion here as we can. And for anybody wondering, this was a test cut where we set the depth of the router too low. So we're just going to leave that. Once stuck to the table, the T-shape of the steel braces should provide decent resistance to the movement of the wood. We loosely marked up where we needed to cut the steel. We'd take about a foot off of each. Instead of legs, the table will sit atop Triton workhorses. We're spacing the steel a width apart so that it runs through the channels designed to take the 2x4s. We're going to chock the braces at intervals, and by tightening or loosening the screws there, we'll be able to manipulate the shape of the table. We brought back the Silverline angle grinder to chop through the steel. Next, we drilled holes at intervals along the part of the steel T-beam that was going to be flat against the table. Wood will naturally move over time, especially with changes in temperature and humidity. If you lock wood firmly in place with screws and braces, you risk it cracking and splitting. To guard against this, you should always leave wiggle room in your fixtures. For this, the holes we drilled in the steel were much larger than the diameter of the screws going through it. Like this, when the wood moves, each screw and screw head can shift with the wood, while still guiding it to an approximate location. Happy with the lineup, we drilled pilot holes where we planned the screws to go. Doing this also lessens the strain on the wood and on each screw, as fewer fibres are forced apart as the screw enters the table. What we're doing here is we're just doing a dry fit of the strengthening beams to the piece itself. We've measured out the distance to go between them so that it fits in the feet of the workhorse, and that's going to be sort of our locating thing. Because there is a slight bow of the table in the middle, we've got a shim at that point only, and Craig has been gradually tightening these drilled bolts all the way down just to kind of hold it in place and send the table back to flat rather than the way that it wants to go. So we're done with that side at the moment as a proof of concept. We're going to do this side and then flip it over and see what it looks like. It's coming together. We're about to cut the ends off, just roughly. We flipped the table so we're at the top. It is looking amazing. The shims underneath with these steel bars are doing their job. You can see there's got one shim in the middle, and that is pulling the table back flat, so it's counteracting that bow that is in the middle of the table there. So you've set up the track saw, TTS 1400, and we are just going to run through it. As you will have seen in the footage, we've taken off the ends. Not an exact cut to where we want it. That's going to be the rough length of it. It's coming in at just under 3 meters. I think it's going to be about 298 centimeters. So you comfortably fit 10 people at that. More tomorrow. Another day the sun is shining. Let me get these off here so that you can actually see the table fully. Step back. There we are. Initial sand is what we're doing today. All of these lines from the slabbing is what we're going to try and get rid of. To prevent the paper gumming up, we're going to keep the sand as local to the wood, and then one for the resin in the centre. Got a couple of low spots that I don't think we're going to be able to get rid of. We fired up the sanders and got to work. Nearly got carried away and did all of the sanding of this without showing you what it ends up looking like. I know some of you will be concerned about the black burn marks where we held the router stationary for too long, but those have come out no problem whatsoever. It is looking pretty fine. As I said, we started with the wood and are now moving on to the resin, and you can see here, if I just flip this around, exactly why. We can only get, perhaps with this initial sand at least, a foot-ish of the resin sanded before you need to degum the paper. Give you an indication. That's what the paper looks like after maybe a foot of sanding. And that's what it should look like. This truly was the hottest day of the year in the south of England, and that was making the resin dust extra sticky and static. You can buy special cleaning sticks or erasers to clean your sandpaper, but we didn't have any to hand. Happy with the work the belt sanders had done, we set the Geos orbital sanders to their dedicated finishing mode and started again with finer paper. The visible lines from the slabbing process quickly disappeared. This was our best view yet of what the finished product was going to look like. That is the whole table sanded to 120. Just been over it with the vacuum, as expected. A couple of refills needed, nothing major. It's always the way, especially when working on something this big. Maybe one, not a concern, that's going to need the most work is where the table had a bit of a reaction here in the middle. Maybe we'll get some compressed air in there and refill that. So the bubbles are visible underneath the surface, and ideally it would be clear cast. So you can see here the effect of what we've done. Prior to polishing, of course, all of this will be crystal clear with our Triton orange metallic underneath. She's taking shape. Exactly the same process as before for these braces. We cut them to length, drilled holes, spaced them, and then fixed them. Side braces are on, the ones across the middle. Those should pull it straight, prevent it from twisting, cupping, whatever else 3 meters of walnut wants to do. We've engineered new shims and put those in place for a dry fit. Got spares, just keeping one in the middle. Across a 3 meter length, I think that is probably pretty good. That's about where I want the table to be. This side definitely naturally has more movement in it than the other side. Craig's is adjusting this side. I think this side we've maybe overdone the middle slightly. You can see maybe a little bit of a dip in the middle. Of course, this is the back of the table, so it will want to sag in the middle. The next day, the goal was to complete all the finish sanding. Thus far, we'd sanded the wood to 80 grit and the resin to 120 grit. We'll go smoother on the wood, maybe up to 320 grit maximum, and smoother still on the resin. So a quick tip when you're sanding. Oldest trick of the book really, you probably all know it. But particularly when you're finished sanding and working your way up through the grits and you need to know where you've been, mark your wood with a pencil as you go. The concept is simple, anywhere the pencil is somewhere you haven't sanded. Join us next time in the final episode. We'll chamfer the table edge, apply finish to and polish the table, and deliver it to its new home.